Hello, my lovely Aries. This reading is for Aries Sun, Moon, Rising, and Venus. Take a moment to relax, take a deep breath, and open your heart to whatever energy is present in this connection. Take what resonates with your story and gently leave the rest behind. Okay. The very first thing I'm picking up from this reading is that someone is going through a pretty powerful awakening. It's almost like they're starting to see everything from a completely different perspective. Things they once ignored, things they avoided, things they convinced themselves didn't really matter. Well, those very things seem to be the ones they can't stop thinking about now. I'm picking up on a major emotional turning point unfolding within this connection. What stands out to me the most is the feeling that someone can no longer keep looking at their life the way they used to. The Tower card comes through very strongly here, not in a loud or dramatic way like people often imagine. It's more like a quiet moment when someone is sitting alone with their thoughts and suddenly realizes that a lot of the things they once believed in weren't nearly as solid as they thought they were. It feels like this person has been looking back on the road they've traveled, looking back on the choices they made, looking back on the times they chose silence instead of honesty, looking back on the moments they thought they still had plenty of time. And what's interesting is, the more they look back, the harder it becomes to ignore the image of you. Honestly, I don't think this is simple nostalgia. It feels deeper than that. It's almost like they're beginning to connect pieces of the puzzle they never wanted to connect before. A decision, a conversation, a distance, a separation that once seemed insignificant. All of it is returning to their mind now from a completely different perspective. The Judgment card appears right beside the Tower card, and it gives me the feeling that they're entering a phase where they're being asked to be honest with themselves. This isn't about what other people think anymore. It's not about circumstances anymore. It's not about the excuses they once used to make themselves feel better. They're beginning to ask themselves some very difficult questions. Did I underestimate this person? Did I take this connection more lightly than I should have? And the thing is, I don't see immediate answers. What I see is awareness slowly unfolding, like someone stepping out of a dark room after being inside for a very long time. At first, everything is blurry. But little by little, their vision adjusts, and what they're starting to see isn't always comfortable. There's a sense of regret here, a little confusion, a little disappointment, because while they're trying to understand what happened, they're also realizing something else. You didn't stay where they left you. You changed, you grew, you kept moving forward. Wow. That realization carries a lot more weight than they expected. It's almost like they're recognizing that they can't look at you through the same lens anymore. The Ace of Swords card appears like a small beam of light, cutting through all of that emotional fog. And I don't feel like this truth is coming from the outside world. I feel like it's coming from within them. A truth they've been avoiding for quite some time. That some people leave a much bigger mark on our lives than we realize in the moment. That sometimes we only understand someone's value after distance enters the picture. And sometimes a person's presence becomes so meaningful that it's only when they're gone that the silence begins to speak. This person seems to be moving through that exact process. I keep seeing them replaying very small memories. A conversation, a word of encouragement, a perspective that only you brought into their life. Things they once considered ordinary have somehow become the very things they can't stop thinking about. And the more they think about them, the harder it becomes to deny the feeling that they may have overlooked something truly valuable. What fascinates me most about this reading is that they haven't reached the end of this awakening. Not even close. The cards aren't revealing all the answers yet. They're simply showing a door that has just begun to open, a truth that has just been seen, an awareness that has finally been named. And somewhere in this moment, the person who once believed they understood you so well is beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, they never fully understood the value of what they had while it was still in their hands. That feeling seems to grow stronger every time they think about you. And what's really standing out to me in this reading is that they're no longer looking at Aries through the lens of the past. They're looking at you through the person you've become. The Six of Cups card appears first here, and honestly, whenever this energy comes through in a story like this, it tends to bring a flood of memories. Not the big dramatic ones, just the ordinary moments. A conversation that seemed insignificant at the time. A moment when you encouraged them, when they didn't even believe in themselves. A moment when you saw potential in them that they couldn't yet see on their own. Those memories seem to surface unexpectedly. Maybe while they're driving somewhere. Maybe during a completely ordinary afternoon. Maybe when they see something that quietly reminds them of you. And what confuses them is that those memories haven't faded with time the way they thought they would. If anything, they've become clearer, more vivid, more meaningful. I keep feeling that they've been quietly watching you for quite some time. Not necessarily in a direct way. Sometimes through things they've heard from other people. Sometimes through small glimpses into your current life. Sometimes through nothing more than a feeling that you're still moving forward. The Star card comes through here, and it gives me the sense that they now see a very different kind of energy in you. An energy they became so familiar with that they stopped recognizing its value. You know, when someone always has light beside them, they rarely stop to appreciate it. Not until they find themselves walking through a darker place. And it may have been during that period of distance that they finally realized what it was that once made them feel at peace. What made them feel understood. What made life feel a little more hopeful. What's interesting is, I don't just see longing here. I don't just see regret. I also see admiration. A genuine admiration. They're looking at the way you've risen after difficult chapters in your life. They're looking at the way you've continued moving forward. They're looking at a level of growth that perhaps they never fully acknowledged before. There's a feeling that they once believed you would always be there. Always patient. Always waiting. Always willing to give them one more chance. But distance has taught them something important. No one stays in the same place forever. No one keeps the same version of themselves alive, simply to wait for someone else to be ready. The Emperor card stands out very strongly here, and what's fascinating is that this energy isn't only describing you. It's reflecting the way they see you now. They see an Aries who feels more grounded, more centered. Someone who understands their worth. Someone who knows their boundaries. Someone who no longer needs outside validation to recognize their own value. And that realization creates two emotions at the same time. Admiration and loss. Because the stronger you appear in their eyes, the more they realize they never fully understood your value when they still had the opportunity to. Sometimes people don't truly recognize the presence of someone extraordinary until distance enters the story. This person seems to be living through that realization now. They keep asking themselves difficult questions. What if I had chosen differently? What if I had been more mature? What if I had been brave enough to face my emotions instead of running from them? Those questions don't seem to leave them alone. And honestly, I don't see answers yet. What I see is awareness, growing, deepening, expanding. The thing that lingers with me most is that they no longer seem interested in convincing themselves that none of this matters. They can't push you out of their mind the way they once could. Because every time they look towards you, they see a version of themselves they might have become. A version that was more mature, more courageous, more honest. And that realization is making the distance between the two of you feel heavier inside their heart. Because deep down, they're beginning to understand that what they regret isn't only the loss of a relationship. It's the fact that someone truly special walked farther and farther away while they were still trying to understand the value of what was standing right in front of them. Another feeling begins to surface here, and honestly, this energy feels different. It's no longer just about missing you. It's no longer just about regret. What I'm picking up now is disappointment slowly rising within them. Not disappointment in you, but disappointment in the things they once chased so relentlessly. There were choices they genuinely believed were right at the time. They believed work mattered more. They believed responsibility had to come first. They believed keeping their emotions under control would somehow keep them safe. For some of them, there was even a belief that staying with what felt familiar would always be better than stepping into something that required growth or change. But as the Seven of Cups card comes through, I get the feeling that they're standing in front of multiple paths, multiple answers, multiple versions of what they thought would make them happy. And they're beginning to realize that not every choice leads to fulfillment. Some things look beautiful from a distance. Some goals felt worth sacrificing everything for. Some people seemed like exactly what they needed. And yet, the farther they traveled down those roads, the more they realized something inside them wasn't changing. The emptiness was still there. The missing piece was still there. The loneliness was still there. What's interesting is that they truly believed life would feel better once they reached certain milestones. Once work became more stable. Once life became easier. Once they completed the plans they had spent so much time pursuing. But when those things finally arrived, the feeling they were waiting for never arrived with them. It's almost like climbing a mountain, believing the answer is waiting at the top, only to get there and realize the view isn't what you imagined it would be. The Devil card appears here, and wow, this energy feels deeply connected to the attachments they once refused to acknowledge. For some, it was pride. For others, it was fear, fear of vulnerability, fear of being hurt, fear of losing control. Sometimes it was the constant need to prove something to other people, and sometimes it was simply familiarity. You know, people often stay in familiar situations much longer than they should because familiarity feels safe. This person seems to have done the same thing. They stayed inside old patterns, old decisions, old ways of thinking, until those very things began to feel suffocating. And the thing is, I don't see anger here. I don't see blame. I don't see them pointing fingers at anyone. What I see is someone slowly realizing that some of the things they placed at the very top of their priority list never truly gave their heart what it was searching for. That's not an easy realization, especially for someone who spent a long time defending their choices. Because once your perspective changes, you can't help but look back at everything differently. And that's where the death card comes through. Not as a sudden ending, not as a disappearance, but more like an old layer of skin slowly being shed. A version of themselves they're beginning to outgrow. I don't feel like they're viewing life through the same belief system anymore. Things that once made them proud don't bring the same satisfaction. Things that once kept them busy aren't enough to distract them from what's missing inside. Some of them are beginning to ask deeper questions. What actually matters to me? What truly makes me feel alive? What opens my heart? And here's the thing. The deeper they go into those questions, the more often your image appears. Not because they're forcing themselves to think about Aries, not because they're trying to relive the past, but because something about you represents a part of life they left behind. A more authentic part, a more emotionally honest part, a part of themselves they weren't brave enough to choose at the time. Honestly, it feels like they're beginning to understand that the problem was never a lack of options. The problem was that they spent so much time choosing things they thought they needed while overlooking what their heart genuinely wanted. And that realization seems to be opening an entirely new door in their journey. A door they never expected to look back at again. What keeps lingering in my mind is that the deeper they move into these new realizations, the harder it becomes to deny the impact you've had on their life. You know, some people enter our lives and leave behind beautiful memories. Some leave behind lessons. But this feels different, because what you left behind wasn't just a memory. It wasn't just a lesson. You held up a mirror, and in that mirror they saw themselves. And honestly, that may have been the very thing that scared them the most back then. The moon card comes through here, and it feels like they're revisiting so many old moments from an entirely different perspective. Conversations they once dismissed. Moments when they thought you were being too sensitive. Times when you asked questions they didn't want to answer. Times when you touched subjects they worked very hard to avoid. Back then, they may have believed those conversations made them uncomfortable because you were asking too much. Too much honesty, too much vulnerability, too much self-reflection. They may have even convinced themselves that you simply didn't understand them. But time has a way of changing perspective. And the more they've grown, the more they've realized something important. The discomfort was never there because you were wrong. The discomfort was there because you saw things they were trying to hide from themselves. Wow. That's a big realization. There's a very quiet energy here. Almost like someone sitting alone, replaying words that were spoken years ago. Words they brushed aside. Words they thought didn't matter. Words they barely listened to. And yet, those same words keep finding their way back into their thoughts now. Maybe you once told them they were avoiding something. Maybe you recognized fears they weren't ready to admit. Maybe you saw wounds they didn't even want to touch themselves. And what's interesting is, you never saw those things through judgment. You saw them through understanding, through compassion, through awareness. And I think that's part of what makes you so difficult to forget. The High Priestess card carries a very strong presence throughout this reading. It feels like this person always sensed there was more to you than what you openly said. Not because you were trying to control them, not because you were constantly analyzing them, but because you noticed what lived underneath the words. You noticed the pauses. You noticed the shifts in emotion. You noticed the insecurity hiding beneath the confident exterior. You noticed things most people overlooked, and sometimes that made them pull away. Because when someone sees the deepest parts of who we are, the first reaction isn't always openness. Sometimes it's defense. Sometimes it's distance. Sometimes it's building walls. And I feel like that's exactly what happened here. They created space. They created barriers. They created reasons to keep you at arm's length. Not because they didn't care, but because they weren't ready to face what your presence was awakening inside them. There were fears they had carried for a very long time. Old wounds they became skilled at hiding. Entire parts of themselves they never allowed anyone to enter. And somehow, You found your way into all of those places without even trying. The Strength card appears here, and I can't help but feel that they're beginning to understand your strength in a completely different way. Not loud strength, not controlling strength, not the kind that needs to win, but the strength of someone willing to be emotionally honest. The strength of someone willing to face difficult truths. The strength of someone willing to love without hiding behind layer after layer of armor. And here's the thing. They're beginning to realize that what they once saw as a weakness in you may actually be something they've always struggled to find within themselves. They thought avoidance would make things easier. They thought silence would make feelings disappear. They thought time would slowly erase everything. But the farther they've traveled, the clearer it has become that the things we need to face never truly leave. They simply wait, quietly, patiently, until we're ready to look at them. And through that process, something else seems to be happening. They're beginning to see you with a level of respect they may never have fully understood before. This isn't just longing anymore. It's not just regret. It's recognition. Recognition for the person who tried to tell them things they weren't mature enough to hear at the time. I keep feeling like an emotional door is slowly opening inside them. Very slowly, very quietly. But enough for them to begin wondering something they may have avoided for a long time. If they hadn't run from those truths back then, if they had stayed, if they had listened, would the story between the two of you have unfolded in a completely different way? That question seems to have stayed with them much longer than they expected. Not the kind of question that appears for a moment and then fades away. It's still there, quietly, silently, following them through the most ordinary days. And honestly, there's a heaviness in this part of the reading that feels impossible to ignore. The Five of Cups card comes through as an emotion they've spent a long time trying not to look at directly. Regret. Not regret because things didn't unfold exactly the way they wanted, but regret because they're beginning to understand the pain they may have left behind. There are things they never really thought about before, or maybe they did, but quickly pushed them aside. Because when someone isn't ready to take emotional responsibility, it's often easier to keep moving than to stop and face what actually happened. This person seems to have done that for quite a while. They stayed busy. They distracted themselves. They kept moving forward with life. But some feelings don't disappear simply because we refuse to think about them. I keep seeing them revisit old moments through a completely different lens now. The conversations you once had. The times you felt disappointed but still remained patient. The moments you opened your heart and didn't receive the same openness in return. What troubles them isn't one specific event. It's the fact that they can finally see the entire picture. And in that picture, they realize you gave far more than they ever acknowledged. There are moments when they seem to wonder just how hurt you really were, how disappointed you may have felt, whether there were emotions you carried quietly that they should have noticed long ago. And what's interesting is, this awareness doesn't seem to be turning into self-punishment. It's turning into honesty. For perhaps the first time, they're no longer searching for excuses. No longer trying to prove that every decision they made back then was justified. Because the more they reflect, the more they understand that the problem was never that you weren't enough. Actually, the thing that confuses them most is realizing they never truly found in anyone else what they once had with you. That energy comes through very clearly here. They've met other people, experienced other situations, explored other opportunities, but something always felt missing, something difficult to name, difficult to explain. Just a lingering feeling that no one created the kind of connection you did. No one made them feel seen in quite the same way. No one challenged them to understand themselves on a deeper level the way you did. And that realization seems to be deepening the regret. The Temperance card appears here almost like a quiet pause after a long emotional storm. I don't feel them resisting their feelings anymore. If anything, it feels like they're learning how to sit with them, to accept them, to observe them, to understand what's truly happening inside their own heart. Part of them is beginning to long for healing, not only for themselves, but for what happened between the two of you. Not because they want to erase the past, but because they're starting to understand that some meaningful full connections deserve more than misunderstanding and silence. The Knight of Cups card catches my attention immediately afterward, because this energy feels like emotion slowly turning into intention, not action yet, not a final decision, not something fully formed, but definitely a growing urge inside them, an urge to say something, to explain something, to let you know that they see things differently now. I keep getting the feeling that they're standing between two emotional worlds. On one side, regret. On the other, the desire to make things right. and the distance between those two places seems to be shrinking. What makes them hesitate isn't a lack of care. It's the understanding that some wounds can't be healed with a few carefully chosen words. They know that if they truly want to repair something, they first have to be honest with themselves. They have to find the courage to face mistakes they've spent a long time avoiding. And honestly, it feels like they're approaching a very important emotional crossroads. A place where they're no longer focused only on what was lost. They're beginning to ask a different question now. What do I do with the feelings that never really left? What do I do with everything that's still living inside my heart today? What really stands out to me now is that this shift inside them is no longer living only in their thoughts. It's slowly becoming something much clearer, a desire they've spent a long time trying to avoid. Honestly, it feels like this person is tired of running circles around their own emotions, tired of pretending everything is fine, tired of carrying words they never said. Because after everything they've been through recently, one thing is becoming impossible to ignore. They don't want to keep carrying this feeling of unfinished business anymore. The Sun card comes through here like a very gentle light, not the kind that arrives all at once, not a blinding flash. More like the first sunlight breaking through after days of gray skies. And I get the feeling they're seeing things more clearly now than they have in a very long time. The things that once confused them, the things that made them hesitate, the things that convinced them to walk away. They don't seem to hold the same weight anymore. They're beginning to understand what truly matters to them. What still moves their heart after all this time? What continues to live in their thoughts no matter how much life changes around them? And what's interesting is, the moment clarity arrives, fear arrives right alongside it. Because once you see the truth, there are fewer places left to hide. I keep feeling that they've spent a lot of time thinking about what it would actually be like to face you. What would they say? Where would they even begin? How would they explain the things that were never explained? How would they look into your eyes after all the distance that's existed between you? The Ace of Cups card appears here as a feeling that never completely disappeared beneath all those old defenses. There were emotions they tried to control, emotions they tried to rationalize, emotions they tried to set aside. But the older they become, the more they understand that feelings don't always disappear simply because we want them to. And wow, that realization seems to be changing something inside them. I see someone slowly allowing themselves to be more honest with their own heart, no longer denying it, no longer renaming it, no longer trying to make it seem smaller than it really is. They're looking directly at it now, maybe for the first time in a very long time. The Emperor card appears right beside it, and this energy feels different from anything we've seen before. This isn't someone who just wants to feel better. This is someone beginning to think about responsibility, consequences, accountability, what it would actually take to rebuild something that was once damaged. Because they're starting to understand that words alone aren't enough, that sincerity isn't measured by promises. It's measured by what someone is willing to do after those promises are spoken. I keep getting the feeling that they're preparing themselves for a conversation that should have happened a long time ago. Not to rewrite the past, not to erase what happened, but because they no longer want everything to remain buried beneath silence. There's another layer showing up here too. A future-oriented energy. And honestly, that's what makes this part of the reading so interesting. Because before, their focus often seemed fixed on the present moment, or whatever felt convenient at the time. But now the Ten of Pentacles card comes through very strongly. Almost like they're asking themselves questions they've never seriously asked before. What do I want my life to look like years from now? Who do I actually want beside me on that journey? Who makes me feel most like myself? Who is the person whose absence still weighs on my heart when I imagine losing them completely? And no, these don't feel like passing thoughts. They feel deeper than that. They feel connected to experiences that have changed them. Lessons they can no longer ignore. Realizations they can no longer push away. Because they're finally beginning to understand that some people enter our lives for more than just emotion. Sometimes they change the way we see love, the way we see connection, the way we see ourselves. This person feels like they're standing in front of a new doorway now, a doorway that asks for courage, honesty, and the kind of maturity that often takes years to develop. I still see some uncertainty, some unanswered questions, some fear about what comes next. But for the first time in a very long time, I don't see them wanting to turn away from those feelings anymore. I see them standing there, quietly, looking ahead, wondering whether the time has finally come to stop running from something their heart may have known for much longer than they were willing to admit. I think the most beautiful part of this reading isn't what happened in the past. It's what both people may have learned through the journey. Because sometimes a connection moves through long periods of silence so that each person can come to understand themselves more deeply. And sometimes it's the distance itself that helps us recognize the value of something that was once standing right beside us. No matter where your story is right now, I hope you continue to trust your own worth. I hope you keep moving forward on your unique path. And most importantly, I hope you continue giving yourself the love, care, and respect you truly deserve. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. You are genuinely important to me, and I never take your presence here for granted. If this reading resonated with your story, take what feels right for you and gently leave the rest behind. Thank you for allowing me to share this space with you. I'll see you again in the next reading. Until then, please take good care of yourself, be kind to your heart, and keep moving forward one step at a time. Bye for now.